All right, put a couple more minutes. A lot of folks found out how to use the chat, which is excellent. And a couple more found the Q&A box. Perfect. For those of you using the app, you have the option of spotlighting or pinning Caitlin, our student interpreter, if you need her services. Welcome, welcome. Shout out to Miss Clipperton's class. Bunch of first graders. Excellent. Awesome, awesome. Also, if you pre-registered, you definitely got a whole handful of links emailed out to you, including the Grand Canyon and our Google Earth virtual tour. Those ones only work, at least the Google Earth one works best on Google Chrome. Yeah. We'll give it one more minute for folks to trickle on in, then we'll jump into the canyon. Cool, I'm excited too. It's gonna be fun. Perfect, perfect. Definitely check your spam box if some of those links did not come out. Otherwise, Zoom doesn't have a good way of sharing that Google Earth link, but we'll make sure when we upload this video, you'll be able to access it that way. Perfect. I'm gonna take a peek off the chat. 12:02, I wanna be respectful of everyone's time, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hi everyone, my name is Chris Whitesides and I work for California State University Northridge Associated Students Outdoor Adventures. We're a nonprofit organization on campus that provides recreational opportunities for our students in our larger community. Our recreation opportunities are kind of limited during this new quarantine routine, so we'll be going virtual today. We'll be using Zoom, which you've already found and can navigate. In this webinar function, you can only use the chat and the question and answer functionality. Feel free to put stuff in the chat that all our panelists can see, or we'll access that Q&A at the end where I will answer some questions live. And we've got some chat support specialists that'll fill in some information there. As we go, I also want to share, we're going to share the link to the Grand Canyon nps.gov website, and our chat support will throw that in the chat right there. Otherwise, that's your intro to Zoom. Your intro to me is I, again, work for Outdoor Adventures as a glorified backpacking guide. My disclaimer is I am not a ranger, geologist, biologist, or formally associated with the park. I'm just a person that really likes to go out and explore these public spaces. So please treat this 30-minute virtual tour as just that. You're going for a walk in the park with a friend, not a ranger. Use that nps.gov to fact check me along the way and to go down your own little rabbit holes of things that interest you. Cool. We got our disclaimer. We know how to use Zoom. We got a whole bunch of classes in here. Let's go ahead and get started as I share my screen. Perfect. We're going to get this set up. And we are all squared away. Welcome to our big, broad overview of how this Google Earth presentation looks. For those of you that brought it up, what we're going to do is we're going to hit this present button and almost treat this like a PowerPoint or like a bunch of slides. We're going to use the table of contents and just click through slides 1 through 15 as we spend a little bit of time at each spot. This is going to take us from our little blue dot right in the middle and really hyper focus on the Grand Canyon and its surrounding area as that's kind of our theme. The Grand Canyon plus the outside, plus the water that makes it what it is today. So we start our exploration with this big, beautiful overview of the US, where the national park system has often been called America's best idea. That idea of preserving lands isn't inherently American or associated with just our country, as indigenous peoples have been protecting, preserving, and and acknowledging the importance of the natural world around them. Today, we're going to focus in on the Colorado River Basin and in this really dry, arid desert of the Southwest US. So let's go ahead and click our first link on the table of contents to move into slide 2, which Google Earth will zoom us in a little bit more on the Colorado River Basin, which is this phenomenally big area that collects water from snow, from rain, and brings it all the way up from places like Wyoming and Colorado, and brings it all the way down to once upon a time that went all the way out to the Gulf of Mexico. There's a whole bunch of different mountain ranges in here, like the Rocky Mountains. There's mountain ranges in Utah, and everything kind of flows downhill into that river system. It's also a weird one. For the longest time, I thought the Grand Canyon ran north to south, south to north, like most rivers, but it's actually kind of east to west. So we'll start to zoom in on the park itself in here. So here we are in the main section of the Grand Canyon as we know it today, kind of from Glen Canyon Dam all the way to Lake Mead. And you can see in here, it almost looks like a little ant farm. It looks like all these crazy cross-cutting canyons that form the collective park itself. And I think it's cool right now to stop and take a peek at just who was in this park well before us. We have evidence that native peoples, indigenous peoples existed in this entire region up to 13,000 years ago. So well before the US was even a thing, well before park rangers were even a thing, this region was controlled, shared, habitated by up to 10 or more than 10 Native American indigenous people tribes, including the Havasupai, the Hopi Indians, the Navajo Nation. All sorts of people called this arid, dry place home and lived and built communities up. Today, we're going to be focusing again on the park itself as we zoom straight in. So let's go ahead and keep on going in and let's enter the park. We're going to start on the side. Oh, let's check. Yeah, we're going to follow that train of thought with indigenous peoples before we hop into the park proper, just because this is such a cool spot, not in the park itself, but just outside in one of these side canyons, as these indigenous people called this area home because it had everything they needed. This is an example of Havasupai Falls, where the Havasupai Indians called home. They had massive communities set up like the town or the village of Supai where they lived. And today you can hike 8 miles down into this gorgeous canyon and you can camp on reservation land where these people still call home. With that kind of tracking along that 13,000 years of human history, there was a point when European explorers started to come into this region. And some of the first European explorers were Spanish explorers. Names like Coronado and Cardenas were some early folks exploring. And they had a really cool interaction when they first came to the Hopi Indians, not the Havasupai Indians, but they came to the Hopi Indians, who said, we're looking for a river that'll get us to California, and we're just looking for a way to really navigate this land. The Hopi Indians, knowing this was their home, knowing it really well, knowing they probably didn't want these strange settlers coming in, took them to the Grand Canyon and said, hey, look, there's really no good way of going around this thing. It's pretty massive. It's pretty, there's a huge roaring river down below. You can't get to California, and there's really no reason for you to stay here. And it led to European settlers kind of at first calling this area inhospitable, inhabitable, because it was so rugged, so massive, and it looked a little bit like this. We're going to go check it out from 7,000 feet on the rim of the canyon to see what those Hopi Indians shared with Spanish explorers. And you could see if you got a whole handful of horses and you're looking to get to the other side from Grand View Point across, you're a little bit daunted. You're a little bit defeated. And you're like, oh man, that's gonna be really hard to get my horses down some steep faces like that. The Spanish explorers were searching for the mythical 7 cities of gold, supposed to exist kind of in the New Mexico region. They didn't find cities of gold, but they did find sweeping, incredible views like this from Grand Viewpoint, where we are dead center in the park. We are looking at the grandest part of the Grand Canyon. So it's home to indigenous peoples. It turned off European settlers at first, but really the story starts 7 billion years ago, where we have some evidence of geologic activity that formed this park itself. Let's zoom in a little bit closer to see what's going on. Right here, we've got our 7 billion years, even down further below this. But what happened was rocks were created deep, deep, deep under the crust of the earth. And kind of like you'd lay bricks for a building or Legos if you're building something, you start with the first piece on the bottom and you build on top. In that same way, the bottom of the Grand Canyon is the oldest bit of rock that exists, and has a really cool name called Vishnu Schist. Super cool name, which is the name of a Hindu god. It's one of the 3 primary Hindu gods, and he's like the preserver or the protector, like this big protective layer around the earth. Yeah, but the story of the Grand Canyon is very much one of geology, and you can see those same layers, those same strata in the rock as you see this different discoloration. We can't actually see the Vishnu schist. It would be super deep in some of these pockets in here. But with uplifting, with tectonic plate movement, the canyon walls on the sides rose and rose, while the middle was carved by the Colorado River. And we're gonna hop to see another spot as we try and get a peek at that river that did the primary carving of the canyon. We're going into the park just a little bit east down the road, a nice drive to Desert's Watchtower, another stunning panorama where we can finally see that little itty bitty Colorado that did all this weathering, eroding, and carving of the canyon. That process is they call down cutting. That's where water goes from a high point and it flows, it moves, it scrapes away rocks and carries it down downstream to the end of the canyon towards the west. It's not just water doing that, but also the water will pick up sediment, will break off rocks, and it'll kind of use that as a wrecking ball as it goes down the river, punching stuff out. This is the picture of the river as it exists today. Historically, the river was much, much wilder and seasonal, where the flows would change from, it was 450 gallons per minute as kind of almost a minimum. And then it could go up to 300,000 CFS or cubic feet per second. So that's like a what? I'm bad at math. That's a 300,000% increase. So it was a seasonal river, and it was really that flooding that carved the canyon as we know it today, not this more stable, placid river that we see. And this is actually Desert Watchtower up here. But if we're talking about the river, let's hop in and see what it actually looks like down in the base of the canyon. So if we're at 7,000 feet up on the rim, we're gonna take a short flight down into the floor of the canyon to see what it looks like today. And this is the mighty Colorado River in its tamed version. Again, it did not always look like this, as it absolutely was more of a seasonal whitewater, more massive, untamed river. It was so untamed that some of the first European non-Spanish explorers, like Joseph Christmas Ives, which is a sweet name, tried to take his steamboat, the Explorer, from the Gulf of Mexico up the river, but he got stopped when he crashed near Lake Mead, so he didn't even make it into the canyon. More famously, well, that picture's small, that doesn't do it justice, is the Civil War veteran John Wesley Powell, dude with a big old beard, who had lost his arm as a veteran. That's taken way too long to load. Lost his arm as a veteran, but he led one of the first European or American descents of the river, where they went down in wooden boats, and he did not have a good time. He named all the stuff he saw like Disaster Falls, or called it his granite prison. But he was one of the first kind of geologists to make his way down and travel the length of the river to see what it is. So why the heck isn't the Grand Canyon of the Colorado River wild, untamed? Why doesn't it look like this picture of John Wesley Powell? That's because we're going to go to slide 8 of 15. And at the head, just before the Grand Canyon kind of starts in earnest, is a big old public works project called the Glen Canyon Dam, which creates Lake Powell, or the Lake Powell Reservoir. In the 1930s through 70s, the United States was infatuated, was in love with building, damming, and controlling these wild, untamed rivers that were pretty hard to predict and even harder to like build cities or agriculture around. Taming these rivers with massive public works projects like Glen Canyon Dam allowed us to store all this drinking water, usable water, and it also allowed us to generate hydroelectricity, which led to the development of cities, of agriculture in place where there probably shouldn't have been. Everything looks like a dry, arid desert. And even John Wesley Powell said nothing will probably come of this land because the water is too scarce and too hard to get to. Human ingenuity really proved differently by overcoming that. Yeah, so this is the Glen Canyon Dam, not seen or less heard of in the story of the Grand Canyon. But let's go back to one of those big old viewpoints and see what we got going on. We're going to go back into the park proper, where we go to Hopi Point, and we can see the river start to snake its way out. This river is much, much browner than that first one we saw at the floor of the canyon. And this is because it's carrying a lot of sediment. It's bringing all that eroded material. When wind and rain breaks down rocks, it weathers it. Erosion is when the water or wind or gravity moves those rocks around to carve away the super steep canyon walls in there. And today, going with the theme of water, a popular way of experiencing the canyon is by the 225-mile rafting trip. It takes anywhere from 12 to 25 days, depending on how fast you paddle. And it's a super popular tourist trip that you need to enter a lottery to get permits and go with a professional outfitter, because it can be wild and it can be beautiful and placid. And this is another super famous viewpoint out here. We can see those same layers of rock. They're just incredible to check out. We'll keep on flying through, and we'll hop over to the end where this water eventually ends up, which is Lake Mead, which is again a reservoir, an artificial lake, and the biggest reservoir in the entire US. It's so big that there's enough water in Lake Mead to serve everyone who lives in California for 1 year. That's like 29 million homes for 1 year worth of water, which is incredible to think about. But the Hoover Dam is a little bit bigger, a little bit more impressive than that Glen Canyon Dam. And it also is a hydroelectric dam, a natural way that we produce electricity. And what I found was super interesting was the vast majority of this, not the vast majority, a lot of this energy actually goes to California, or all you folk in LA. When you turn on your lights, you're using Colorado River water to power your lights. LA is 300 miles away, and that's also where a lot of Lake Mead's water goes for agriculture, or it might be a rumor, I gotta check myself, but if you turn on the water fountain at Disneyland, you might actually be drinking Colorado River water from Wyoming. Super crazy to think about. Let's go ahead and hop back into the park from our Hoover Dam stop. And I'll stop geeking out about waterways and start geeking out about the park itself. This is Yaqui Point, another super popular spot. And all the locations that we've been to so far of these viewpoints, they've all been on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. The far more popular stop and location, because it's a lot more developed than its sister site on the north rim, which also has a visitor center and which also has some really scenic vistas. And that's actually where we will end our virtual tour today. But Yaqui Point and the South Rim are home to two of the main trailheads, and that's relatively small, isn't it? But Bright Angel Trailhead and South Kaibab Trailhead are two of the main ways of getting down inside the park for the 5 million people that visit the park each year. Both of those trails meet up right at that spot that we saw on the Colorado River, and then extend all the way out super duper far to that North Kaibab Trailhead and that North Rim Visitor Center that we talked about. You can actually hike that entire thing in a day if you're fast and it's not hot and you're super duper prepared, but most people do not. It's 21 miles from the South Rim to the North Rim, and I backpacked from South Rim to North Rim, back to North Rim, but there are also shuttles that run. So there are lots of different ways for you to access it. But again, it's super steep and really difficult hiking. The temperatures can reach up to 120 degrees in the summer and as low as -22 because we're up pretty high. It almost doesn't even look like a desert with all these trees going on up here. So it is a land of extremes, extreme temp, extreme elevation, but those extremes didn't stop people from developing this area. We knew indigenous peoples have been here for a super long time. We knew some European explorers checked this out and tried to make it work. The next wave of people would have been prospectors, hoping for gold, silver, what was the other one? Asbestos, which was weird. Later on, plutonium. Yeah, crazy that people were mining for that. Those prospectors mostly were met with bad luck. They did not find what they were looking for, except they started to find that this location, this kind of the only place that this was the only place that this existed as a phenomena, and people were interested in finding out about what John Wesley Powell was writing and exploring. This kind of created or led to the development of Grand Canyon Village, which is just that. It's a pretty developed center for the park to kind of work out of. It's got a bunch of different lodges, and these pictures aren't loading, but that's okay. It's got a bunch of different lodges. It's got some photo studios. It has all the amenities you would want, whether it's hotels, campgrounds, visitor centers, and there's a road that runs all the way around the rim, as well as a trail to allow you to access all those different viewpoints. The village was kind of built or helped by a railroad, the Santa Fe Railroad Company, that was established there and brought folks. We had the writing of John Wesley Powell that encouraged people to go check it out. But then two folks named the Kolb brothers, Kolb, took photographs, much like Ansel Adams of Yosemite. These photographs caught on in popularity, helped share the visual story of the Grand Canyon, and led to a massive influx of visitors into the park. Besides the development of Grand Canyon Village, as the park becomes a park in 1919, there's also some push to continue to develop amenities to help people enjoy this space. Kind of that sacrifice between rugged and inhospitable and accommodating or allowing people to experience some degree of it. Phantom Ranch is one such example. So just down the road this way was that site where we were checking out the mighty Colorado River. This is all of a mile, 2 miles up that river to Phantom Ranch, which is a collection of lodges that are in this kind of rustic cabin style. And they were designed and developed by the architect and interior designer, Mary Elizabeth Jane Coulter. super cool to see a woman in a position of power and really shaping the park to what it is today. Mary Coulter is kind of the predecessor for what we now know as rustic aesthetic, like California Adventures, any cabin you've seen. Mary Elizabeth Jane Coulter was formative in creating that kind of aesthetic, that kind of look. And she was also a pretty well-known perfectionist. And upon her design, when she proposed her design of Phantom Ranch, the park director at the time said, "Sweet, we'll call it the Roosevelt Chalet," because we seem to name everything after presidents. And she grabbed her design off the table and said, "No, you will not. If you want my design, it's called Phantom Ranch. Deal with it." And now we still have Phantom Ranch as it is today. We'll keep jumping around. To be honest, I didn't have a good place to talk about this, but I wanted to. Ribbon Falls is a cool stop as you're hiking rim to rim and kind of hiking from the north end. Let's see if that actually loads in. Maybe not. There we go. Ribbon Falls is a super cool spot, kind of showing that it's not just this big desolate canyon, that there is a lot of wildlife in the way of plants, fauna, and animals. So plants and animals are living here, but this weird, goofy picture that I have here is the now extinct Shasta ground sloth, which once called this Grand Canyon region its home. The Shasta ground sloth was a species and one of the smaller types of its own species, a lot different from the tree sloths that we have today. These animals were about the size of bears. They walked around on all fours on the ground, not in trees, and they called these arid regions their home, most likely because thousands of years ago, they weren't this dry, they weren't this arid, they probably looked more and more like Ribbon Falls. And we know that these Shasta ground sloths lived in this area because we found skeletal remains in a cave, the Rampart Cave in Grand Canyon National Park. And there was 5 feet, it's like almost my height, of poop, of fecal matter that had all sorts of evidence, like different animal bones, whether it was the bones of the actual ground sloth next to it, and a whole lot of pollen was preserved in this 5 feet, 10,000-year-old sloth poop, which has provided really cool evidence of an extinct species and that this Grand Canyon was once a more lush spot that looked more like Ribbon Falls. Ground sloth. Sorry for that weird tangent. I think they're phenomenally interesting. They've got a cool history with the Joshua tree too, where they kind of have ate the Joshua tree and carried the seeds around. And this was our problematic slide, which is supposed to be, let's see if we can get a shot from the north rim and see if we can peek out there. Bingo, here we go. Cool. So we're gonna end our tour and our journey on the north rim of the canyon, where it's just as big, just as beautiful, and you can see all those different colored layers of those rocks that we talked about. A phenomenal spot as we look out to kind of where we started, over way, way, way far away on the south rim. The north rim is even a little bit higher than the south, and it's almost a different ecological biome. There are buffalo up here on the north rim. That's how less deserty or different it can be. Yeah, but this is a cool wall to end on, and just see the geologic processes as those rocks have risen up. That was a tough one. As the river carved down and away. And we'll go ahead and stop right there. Thank you for our super duper quick flyover of Grand Canyon National Park. Letting me geek out about all the water that made the park. Let me geek out about the giant ground sloths. Definitely something to look more into. And some of the folks that called Grand Canyon their home and kind of helped it to develop to become what it is today. We're going to keep doing these super short, super sweet virtual tours every Monday at 6 and Thursday at 12. The link that you used will be the exact same one, and it'll be the same process where it lets you into the room early. Monday, we actually have a ranger from Channel Islands that's going to give a presentation on her park. And then we've got a ranger from Grand Tetons on Thursday. So they will be far more knowledgeable, and give a better overview of the park than your glorified guide gave today. I'm going to go ahead and get to the Q&A in a second. So go ahead and start plugging some questions in there. While we wait, my chat support are going to share a couple links to that national park website again. That'll have a lot more information. We'll also throw in our email address, outdooradventures@csun.edu. If you have other questions, if there's a park you'd like to see, or if we can do a custom program for any group, I'm down. I'm trying to figure out how to do the oceans. I think that'd be a super fun one. Yeah. What else? These tours, these kind of programs are made possible due to super generous donations from our community. And we also have a merchandise shop up now. So you can buy an Outdoor Adventure shirt. It's cool. It's got the mountains. It's got a little van going out on an adventure to show your support, to show off that you're a virtual tour pro. All right, I'm going to go ahead and jump into these Q&As and see if we can get to some of them. I did take a Red Cross instructor course in Irvine. It was actually a lifeguard instructor course. But hi, Dan. What kind of animals live in the Grand Canyon? That's an awesome question. We have all sorts of stuff from bats. There's a ton of different birds, reptiles. There's lots of coyotes. There's lots of ground squirrels that are a little bit too domesticated, too tame, too used to humans feeding them up on the rim. And there's also some fish that live in the river itself. The floor of the canyon, the Colorado River, kind of sits at 2,000 feet above sea level, while the wall of that Grand Canyon, where we saw some of those viewpoints, can get as high as 9,000 feet above sea level. So you got to go down 100 switchbacks, more than 100. You got to go down 7,000 feet of elevation. Pretty crazy. The best time to hike from rim to rim, there's definitely a sweet spot. I think it's going to be in the spring or super duper late fall, almost to winter. I cut it a little close, and there was still a lot of snow on the north rim. So we had to bring snowshoes and crampons, like little spikes for your shoes, because there was so much snow and ice. But it's definitely not recommended if you want to enjoy it during the summer when those temperatures can get up to like 120 degrees. Ugh. Is it easier to hike north to south or south to north? That is going to be a question for that NPS website. There's not a ton of different trails in that kind of park proper in that area I showed you. I really enjoyed going south to north. View-wise, I mean, I did both. I don't know. Check the NPS website. What skill level would you say best for hiking the Grand Canyon? Are there trail options for novices? In my opinion, the Grand Canyon is some of the most difficult hiking because of that massive elevation gain over a relatively short chunk of time. And with those kind of extremes in heat, plus there's a lot of visitors on a few trails. It's kind of best to go in those shoulder seasons as you get closer to the winter or right at the start of spring. But there are some really nice trails to hike and bring kids to that go around the rim. They kind of follow that lip on the south rim, and they're super nice and accessible to go to. And it's a great place to bring kids, maybe for their first park, because the village is pretty well developed. Grocery stores, restaurants, you have some amenities that you wouldn't otherwise have, while it still feels like you're in a very natural spot. Grand Canyon Village is super well designed. You do need a permit and a reservation to camp at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. Phantom Ranch isn't your only option. There are places like Indian Gardens, and there's Horseshoe with a word at the end. It's escaping me right now. But there are a handful of different spots you can backpack to and camp at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, or you can put in those reservations to Phantom Ranch if you want to sleep in a real bed. Are there dinosaur fossils? That's a super cool question. And the answer is, I don't know. Maybe the National Park System will have some better information, but I can look it up. And if you want to leave your email address in the chat, I can try and follow up with you, other Chris. Cool. Visitors can go rafting. How cold are the rivers? That is another good question. For the most part, whenever there's a river behind a reservoir, that reservoir is kind of built like a pyramid almost. It's relatively narrow at the top, and it gets big and super wide at the bottom to hold back all that deep, deep water behind in the reservoir. As it lets water out, it usually lets water out from the bottom of that reservoir, so it is super duper cold flowing through. I don't know the water in the Grand Canyon, but like the water coming out from Lake Mead, I don't think it ever gets above 50 degrees. I canoe that spot called the Black Canyon just under the Hoover Dam, and it is always frigid. I always want it to be warmer, but it is not. Oh, we got another rim to rim to rim hiker. I think my favorite place in the park was that Ribbon Falls. Again, I did it late winter, super early spring, so there was no one in the park. It was just a really cool little side trip. Can the Colorado freeze? I missed that one. Oh, this is a good question about, some of the other indigenous tribes and indigenous peoples that called this place home. I don't know a ton, but in the park, there are a whole bunch of designated, relatively well-preserved ruins. Tunysa, I'll butcher the name and I apologize, is a set of ruins that's close to Desert Watchtower. And there's a lot of interpretive walks and trails that share those thousands and thousands of years of human history, how they used the park and the region. How old is the Grand Canyon is a good question. Geologically, we're talking billions and billions of years old. In terms of being a national park, 1919 was the year that it was established. So it just passed its 100th birthday. I'm bad at math. I usually need to take off my shoes to count that high. I think 100 years. On that note of how old is the Grand Canyon, and me throwing around 7 billion, millions of years, geologists are continuing to kind of bring up or present theories as to how the canyon formed. Right now, we're relatively set on, or we know there was uplifting, down cutting of the river, weathering and erosion, but there's also some more, not off the wall, but some theories that have been presented that talk about an ancient lake that burst. And that ancient lake bursting flooded or caused this massive, massive amount of water to flow down into the canyon itself. Another theory is that underwater systems, like we have groundwater and we have these big almost caverns or big lakes underground, was that those underwater caverns and lakes collapsed. And that's what actually helped or lead to that quicker falling down on the side. So it's cool that theories are still being presented, evidence being found to prove, disprove, or continue to think critically about the history. Is there a road all the way around the canyon rim for driving? In the park, there is a road from Hermit's Rest out to the east side, but you can't drive like the continuous 225 miles, but you can drive from the south rim to the north rim. It just takes a super long time. I have not done the mule rides, but they were one of the first tourist attractions to get people safely and relatively comfortably down for some of those views inside the canyon. And they're still being done today, where you can rent mules, go with a guide, and go all the way down to Phantom Ranch. The best way to visit Havasupai Falls, I have not done it yet, but the Havasupai tribe and reservation manages that entire space, and they do a really good job of managing the area, still allowing it to be accessible, and protecting those lands and their culture as well. They have a lot of resources at their website about best time to go, what to expect, and how to be respectful as you go to the area. But it is a popular one. We'll do 3 more minutes of these. And I do not know how many people fall from the top of the rim, but it's a good time to be with 5 million visitors. It's everyone's responsibility to be safe and respectful of all these places that we go. At the end of the day, that Instagram picture, probably not worth it. Grand Canyon National Park is really well developed, is really safe, has a lot of guidelines to how you should interact and be in that park. How did they tame the river? They make these massive, massive funnels or big tubes that redirect the river around the natural spot where it used to flow. Once that is dry and empty, that's when they build that pyramid dam. Super wide at the bottom, relatively narrow at the top. And then they allow that reservoir to fill up behind it. When Lake Mead filled up, there was a period of time, or for most of history, the Colorado River Basin would go all the way out to the Gulf of Mexico. It no longer does that, as Lake Mead kind of collects all that water, and different agencies, organizations, people all share from that water. Mexico actually stores some of its water in Lake Mead, and there are always 101 different legal decisions being made as to share that waterway. Looks like 6 hours to drive from South Rim to North Rim. Thank you, David. Is the canyon still getting bigger? Yeah, 100%. That Colorado River, despite being tamer, is still doing some down cutting, but now more so weathering is when, again, wind, rain kind of breaks down rocks. Erosion is what moves those rocks. Either the wind smashes it into another side of the cliff, or water move those rocks around. Let's see. Yeah, and Grand Canyon Village is the only place I can attest to, but the cell phone service is really good, and there should be Wi-Fi at all the hotels and restaurants. We'll do 2 more of these. Yeah, you can swim in some of the sections of Havasupai Falls. Again, the Havasupai tribe and reservation manages that really well, so check out their website. Oh, cool. That's awesome. It sounds like there's a book of all the ways that people have died in the Grand Canyon, if kind of thanatourism is your thing. 5 million people come to the park every year. I don't know how many people will go to the park this year, as it is definitely closed off due to the COVID crisis. Continue to monitor that NPS page for updates or plans. Sunrises and sunsets are phenomenal from any point in the Grand Canyon. There are lots of animals. There are even elk. I forgot to talk about, there's a ton of elk on the South Rim, and I'm always blown away by how big they are. I always think desert, but it's not. It's that 7,000, 9,000 feet is really a different biome than the desert. Cool. Wow, that looks like a bunch. We're right at 12:45. We're gonna go ahead and answer some more of these questions in email format, and then we're gonna upload this video to our website, which just got posted, or I'll post right now, so you can find those. But after I share these resources, this will be goodbye for now, and I will see you all when? Monday, 6 p.m. Pacific time. Same link, same place. And here are those links right here one more time, just in case. Hope those worked. Cool. All right, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you for the good questions, and we will see you all later.